Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline, and I am a consultant at the Antioch Writing Lab. And I'm giving a presentation today on citing your sources. So I just want to remind everyone that the session is being recorded, so any audio that is shared will be included in the recording, but video is going to be edited out. So don't worry about that if you're worried about that at all. If you have any questions at all today, feel free to just kind of unmute yourself and speak up while I'm talking, because I can't necessarily see everybody. It's hard on my computer. So if you have, you could also use the chat box and put your questions into there, and I'll get to those at the end of like each little bit of sections that I have. So there's that. If you attended the APA 101 workshop at the beginning of the quarter, some of this information is going to overlap, but the presentation also elaborates a little bit more on that as well. So yeah. So today I am going to cover the outline. Here we go. And I'm going to look at why we use APA, why we use citations, and then I'm going to talk a bit about in-text citations and references, and then I provide some APA resources for you to look at, and then there's some questions, time for questions at the end. So why do we use APA? APA is used among a lot of scholars and students within a ton of different disciplines all over the US, and it creates consistency in the way that the discourses can communicate with each other and share their own ideas in a format that everyone will understand. So, and AUS uses APA guidelines, so that's why, another reason why we should use them as well. So kind of an example of discourses talking to each other. If I'm reading someone else's information and I want to use a resource that they give because I'm like, oh my goodness, that looks awesome. So I scroll down, I know exactly where to find that information because the in-text citation should match the references page. And then the reference should be able to show me exactly where I can locate the article because I am familiar with the way that the references are formatted. So that's kind of an example of why using APA. If APA isn't formatted in the way that everyone understands, sometimes it can hinder that academic conversation process. So it can, using APA could better research in the future in a way if people are more able to understand the different steps that others are using. However, I completely understand if APA is not your thing and you're like, I don't get this and I don't want to do it at all. So I empower you to it is a gatekeeping tactic, totally. So if you want to change it, I empower you to work towards changing it and work your way up the system to make it change. So any questions at all thus far about why we use APA?
I have a question, but it's not about why we use APA. It's more about like when. So for example, I'm working on an article right now, not for school, but I'm using resources that, like if I were writing a school paper, I'd be using APA, but I'm curious if I'm supposed to be using APA citations in this article or if I'm supposed to be using something else.
That's a really good question. Depending on what you're writing and and where it's going to will depend on like I would say the format that you use. So just the other day, for an assignment, I had to write a letter to a senator, and it was supposed to be an APA format, but instead we used endnotes, and the endnotes connected to a references page. So it was like a morphed version of APA. It was different. So I think that depending on the situation and what you're writing for and who you're submitting it to, whichever format they're using would probably be the best format to use. So if you're submitting to like a specific journal, looking at that journal and how previous publications of that journal have utilized formatting styles.
So if it's not a journal, but it's like, I don't know, like a BuzzFeed or Huffington Post or something like that, like something more media-like?
Oh, yeah. I would say looking at, I can't give you an exact answer for that because that is a difficult question. I would say, however, previous publications of whatever work it is use that format. So if it is going to be like a BuzzFeed article, I'd recommend looking at how BuzzFeed cites their references and then utilize that.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Oh. Awesome. So I shall go on to citations. Welcome to the citations game. But why do we use citations? Because it helps clearly mark your idea from somebody else's ideas or thoughts. So that way, you get the credit for the information that you did, which is awesome, and the author gets creditation for the information that they contributed as well. So it's semi a win-win in a way, but you just have to cite, which might not feel like a win. If you are, so it also increases your credibility as a writer. So if me, as a WE student, I don't quite have the credibility under my belt to say this information is correct. However, if I bring in somebody with years of experience and like a ton of research under their belt, I can use their credibility to enhance my own idea. So then I can be a more credible writer because I have done my research and I've proven it by throwing in these citations and showing that this information is correct. So when using in-text citations, specifically for paraphrasing or summarizing, you want to cite the source, the author, and the year for the publication. So you can do two different ways. There is so this here is called a parenthetical citation, not that you need to know that. And this is called a narrative citation. So when you use I'm trying to keep them straight in my mind. When you use a parenthetical citation, you're using the author's information, but you're doing it in your own voice, which is great. So then you throw their information at the end of the sentence saying, yep, this sentence is from them. And when you do a narrative citation, you just have the author or authors in your sentence, and you put the year after their name. And actually, an APA style, it is preferred to paraphrase or summarize over using quotations. So if at any way you can paraphrase or summarize the information that you read, it is a preferred method because it helps with the flow and your own academic voice while going through the paper. But for those times when you're like, I cannot phrase that anymore better, my grammar's great, any more better than the author, you can use a direct quote. So when a direct quote, you don't want to do what is called a dropped quote, which means you just throw the citation in there and you don't have any of your own voice at all. So you want to use a signal phrase. So some signal phrases could be according to, or so-and-so says, blah. I'd recommend not using the same signal phrase over and over again if possible, but because it can become redundant, but sometimes you do what best will fit for you in the moment. So when doing a direct quote, you also need to include a page number. Or, and I'll talk about this later, it's a page number or any other way that the reader can find that quotation. So the format of it, the direct quote, will be in a narrative format is Bowen said quotation. And you always want to make sure that your punctuation goes after the page number as well at the end of the quote. If you do a narrative cite, parenthetical, this is a narrative. I'm going to stop using those terminologies. If you do it the bottom way, you can just throw the author, year, and page number at the end. If you use a long quotation, which is 40 words or more, you want to put it in its own complete box. This is a very small picture, so I'm going to enlarge it. So here, the author put the signal phrase before they put their long quotation. So then the long quotation gets indented, and you don't use quotation marks because the indentation is an indication that it's a quotation already. And the punctuation for here actually goes before the page number. And then when you're getting out of the long quote, you want to make sure that your paragraph is not indented afterwards, so it's left aligned again. But what if there's no page number? You want to just make sure that you include the best way that somebody can locate it. So sometimes people will put a section title, like this was in the discussion section, or sometimes you can put a paragraph number, which happens a lot when you do a website or a web article. You could do paragraph 2, but that also means, yes, you do need to count all of the paragraphs, which can be a lot sometimes. So consider how lengthy the article you're using is and whether or not you want to give the section title or the page paragraph number, whichever way would be easiest. For you and the reader too, keeping in mind your reader may not want to count all of those paragraph numbers either. So secondary sources, which are when your author of the article you're reading references somebody else. This is not necessarily a preferred method. I will point that out quickly too. It is recommended that you go find the original source and cite the original source. You want to make sure that the author that you're reading correctly used the source that they are referencing. If you are doing a secondary source and you're directly citing this author, you are assuming that the author correctly cited the original, which they probably did, but you also want to make sure, because you don't want to accidentally incorrectly use the original article either. So, however, I can also understand that some original sources are very jargony and really difficult to understand. So if that happens, that's primarily why secondary sources is still available to us in APA. So you could still definitely use it if that original source is really difficult to understand or unlocatable. Sometimes that can happen too. So the two different ways you would cite these are a reference said, blah, 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 and then you put as cited by, and then the author of your original, of what you're actually looking at in the year. So, Nagy, I can't remember that theorist's pronunciation, and I feel bad. Nagy is I have been told, a very heavy person to read. So using Nagy as cited by, and then this is a class handout. and then they put the definition. That works as well. And if there are multiple authors, 1 author, 2 author, 3 author, or more, here are the different ways that you can do your citations. So if doing 1 author, here's the narrative and parenthetical. 2 authors, make sure to not use the ampersand in your sentence, but if you're doing the parenthetical, you use your ampersand for the end of the sentence. And if you're using 3 authors or more, you will always do et al. You no longer have to list any of the authors that we previously had to in APA 6th. So for narrative, it is like Bowen et al. And the period goes after all. And yes, it goes period, comma, year for the parenthetical. It might look a little funky, but that is the correct way of doing it. And when citing when doing multiple citations, but the same author is doing all of your information. So let's say you're summarizing some research article and you're saying you have the information at the beginning, and then you want to cite the information at the beginning of the paragraph and cite the information at the end of the paragraph. If you use any other citations or any other author's information in between, you'll need to add a citation before and after if you're going to continue talking about the original article. That might be confusing. I have an example later if it doesn't make sense yet. So if you use a narrative citation, however, you do not need the year after. If you've cited the person before and you use a narrative citation later, you do not need the year in the narrative citation. So here is an example. So here, this person says this. He also says information about this and says this. But this other person says this information. So Bowen says, and then you go back to the original article, Bowen says this, and then if you end with his information, you have the citation at the end here. So this is all Bowen's information, so you didn't have to, so it's cited at the beginning and then the end of his information. And then this is a narrative citation, so you don't need a citation at the end of this sentence. But then you add somebody else's argument here. So then after that, you need a citation for the next sentence because it switched back to Bowen. But this is a narrative citation again, so it doesn't need a year. But then if you continue using Bowen's information, you need to have his citation at the end here. All right, and that is the end of talking about in-text citations. Any questions at all about in-text citations thus far? And I'm sorry if that was confusing. All right. So, and Pearson points out, non-book sources. Pearson, what do you mean by non-book sources? Oh, like films. Yes. Great point, great point. If you are citing a film and you're using a direct quote, you need to put the time in which that quote happened in the video. So looking at, if there's no page number, like a video doesn't have page numbers, you need to put the time that the quote happened, which can be really difficult sometimes, and you have to, and finding the exact time that it happened, but that's how somebody is going to be able to find the quote that you're talking about. So that might be a time too where you want to paraphrase or summarize instead of using a direct quote from a video. That's some way that I get around that, but you need to have the time period for it. Thank you for that question though. Any other questions at all? Going once, going twice. How do you do in-text? Magazine articles. In-text citations for magazine articles are going to be similar to in-text citations for the page numbers of journal articles or they are going to be similar to, let me find, the normal in-text citations here. One group, but the cited article is by a different author. Okay, so question is, how do you cite in-text cite magazine articles or edited books where the book is edited by one group but cited article is by a different author? So if you have work from an edited book, you are going to cite the author of that chapter. You're not going to cite the author of the book. You're going to cite the author of the chapter because that's what's going to go in your references page. And now that I think about it, I don't have an example of that, but I will talk about it later. So you're going to cite the person who wrote the chapter. So, I think I know the book you're talking about. So so let's say that McGoldrick edited this entire book, but chapter 12 is written by John Smith. John Smith is going to be the author, not McGoldrick. Does that answer that question? Awesome. All right, so references. For references, which is what goes at the very end of your paper on its own page. I utilize our Purdue for my references, alongside the APA manual, which I have access to, which is nice for me. But if you don't have access to the APA manual, I highly recommend the Purdue OWL website. I recommend not using citations from the database itself, or if you do, I recommend double checking that it's correct. So if there's ever a, how do I cite this button, and you click it, I always recommend double checking it, because a lot of the time in the writing lab, the citations come back incorrect or just a tad off. Just a tad. If that's okay with you and you're not a perfectionist, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, but that's my bad. That is up to you. Oh, also double check some from syllabi as well. Some syllabi aren't quite up to date on APA 7th yet. So, and you also want to make sure that all of your references are actually used in your paper. You don't want to put a reference for something that you didn't reference in your paper. So if to do that, I usually Control F after I've finished the entire paper. I'll Control F, which is search the document, to ensure all of my sources are used. Oh, so now I'm breaking down various types of references you might use, and I give some examples. Oh, I didn't say this at the beginning. If you want access to the PowerPoint, it would be great if you just email the Writing Lab. I'll put the Writing Lab email in the chat box and I can send it out to you. So when doing when doing a journal article, you will do the author's names, the date, and then the title of article. The title of the article is going to be in what is called sentence case. So you capitalize the beginning of the title, and you capitalize any proper nouns that are used in the title, which are like names. And if you have a colon and there's a subtitle to the article, you capitalize the first thing after the colon, and you'll uncapitalize anything else afterwards. Then period, and you italicize the journal article. The journal article, you will have all caps, or not all caps. You will have in the format that the journal has it, so you will capitalize whatever the journal capitalizes. Then you have the issue number, which is still italics, volume number in parentheses, comma, page range, and DOI numbers. It is recommended that you turn them into URLs. So whenever you have a DOI number, you can put https://doi.org/ and then you just paste the DOI number and it'll create a URL for you. And if you are turning in your paper online, it is you keep the hyperlink this time. So you will keep the hyperlink so that the reader can just click it and go directly to the article. For books, you'll have the author and the date, the title of the book, the publisher's name, and that's it. If it has DOI, you put the DOI. If it doesn't, you don't have to, because a lot of books don't have DOIs. But if they do, you put it there. You do not need the location of publication anymore for this either. For unpublished class handouts, it is rather difficult for a reader to find and locate an unpublished class handout, which is why that you need to have a lot of information for these. So you have the author of the handout, the year you received it and the quarter you received it in, the class number and the class name, and the handout title name, and then in brackets you literally put class handout, and then you need to put the department that the class was from and the school name. So here is an example for you as well. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger too. So when doing references for videos, you put the name of the person who did the video, but you also need to include their username. So if you have a YouTube video, you need to include the username and the year, month, and day that it was published, the title of the video, literally put in brackets the word video, and then you put whatever streaming service you found the video on. So whether it's TED Talk, or if it's YouTube or Netflix, you put that there, and you put the URL to how you can find the video. Blogs. For blogs, you put author, year it was published, title of the post, the publisher, and the URL. Sometimes the publisher and the name and the author are going to be the same. So if the publisher and the author are the same, you can put author instead of the name of the publisher again. So for, let's say the APA were to publish something online. So you put APA, and then here it would say publisher or author. So here is how to do podcasts. There's the host. You literally put host, the date, title of the episode, the number, if it's provided, in brackets, audio podcast episode, the name of the podcast itself, the publisher of the podcast, and the URL to find the podcast. Websites, you put the author, the year, month, and date of publication, the title of the page that you are reading, so like the title of the article, and then you can put the site name and the URL. So for websites, this is primarily where I see the site name and the author being the exact same, and that's completely normal. So if your author and your site name are the same, that's fine. And you can just put author instead of restating the author again. All right, so that was the end of those thus far. I'm gonna go back to the chat to just check out what was said. All right, is there any questions at all? Thus far. Yeah, that section was a little dry, I'm sorry. So I kind of talked about some APA resources for everybody already, but here's a link to the Purdue OWL website, and you can use the APA style website as well if you don't have access to the APA manual. There's also a lot, as Pearson said in the chat, there's a lot of APA style things out right now, so Google can help you as well. Also, I should have said this, if you have a specific question, the Writing Lab is open to just, if you have a quick question, just email us and we can get back to you about your question. The Virtual Writing Lab also has a Ask a Quick Question on their side as well. So if you want to ask a quick question to the VWC or to us at the Writing Lab, both options are available. The VWC works on weekends. So if you have a paper due at like Sunday night, I recommend asking it to them because they're open and we aren't. So just to note that too. Other than that, that is all I have for you today.